Why the state of Texas is spending millions on research to develop a psychedelic drug. Details on today's Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso. Other stories we're tracking: profits for Texas restaurants are plummeting as ICE arrests more immigrants. What restaurant owners want the Trump administration to do. Plus, a deadline to ensure digital materials are accessible for people with disabilities has been extended. Why and what the delay means. Also, a new cancer center for patients who need care in rural Texas. And Into the Light, a portrait exhibit puts a face on the opioid crisis. These stories and much more on today's Texas Standard. From the sandy beaches of South Padre Island to the Chihuahuan Desert of far west Texas. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 21st day of April 2026. I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso. So glad you can join us. Getting a new drug on pharmacy shelves is a lengthy and expensive process. It involves research, clinical trials, and requires the approval of the federal government. So there's risk involved. The state of Texas was looking for a pharmaceutical company to partner with in developing ibogaine. That's a psychedelic drug that may provide relief to those suffering from brain trauma, including PTSD. It's also seen as a promising treatment for addiction, like opioid addiction. And right now, people are crossing into Mexico seeking ibogaine treatment. The powerful drug is considered high risk, and it's illegal in the U.S., but that could change if it wins FDA approval. A few days ago, those who want to see that happen got some high-profile support. President Trump, at a ceremony in the Oval Office, signed an executive order accelerating research into psychedelics, including ibogaine. He said it is, quote, for our cherished veterans. He also announced the federal government will invest $50 million in research into ibogaine. So what does that mean for Texas's unprecedented plan to develop the drug? And how will the state do this without a drug company partner? Here to tell us more is Stephen Simpson, who covers mental health for the Texas Tribune. Stephen, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what is ibogaine, and what do researchers hope it might be used for?
Well, ibogaine is pretty much an African tree shrub that in historical times was used by shamans for spiritual purposes. But more recently, researchers have found that it can be used to alleviate brain trauma and remove some of the drug addiction symptoms.
Really fascinating. Where is the money to fund this trial coming from?
Well, part of the money is coming from Texas tax dollars from a bill that we signed last year that pretty much gave a grant to several different universities across Texas, a $50 million grant to kind of start off an ibogaine research program. The other additional money seems to be coming from the federal government right now, which came from President Trump's order over the weekend.
Well, let's delve into that. What will the federal government's role be in this, and why do you think this is something that attracted the Trump administration's attention?
Well, beyond just the funding part, what's going to be key from the federal government is sort of FDA approval. A lot of FDA approval takes sometimes years and even longer. But if you look a little bit further down the line, if the research gets done, the federal government can say, let's expedite this FDA approval to make it done in like a couple of weeks.
So getting back to Texas, so what was the plan? The state wanted to attract drug companies to be part of the effort. Why didn't that happen, and why is Texas taking this on its own rather than maybe a state like California, New York, or even Florida?
Well, state officials haven't exactly said why the drug companies weren't getting involved, but from what we've heard from drug policy experts is that the terms that Texas put on it were too strong. They had to match the own $50 million grant and also provide Texas any of those additional revenue that comes from selling the medication. And so for drug businesses, it was kind of seen as not worth the cost.
The cost and the risk. So they would have had to share some of the proceeds from the drug?
Yes, they had been up to 40% of the proceeds would go to Texas.
Is there a precedent for this kind of state-run drug trial?
There's been states kind of involved in drug trials, but for it to be this big of a state-led, where it's pretty much just state universities kind of taking all this on, this is pretty unprecedented. And you're starting to see other states kind of look at our model and start to kind of do some of the same, where we've seen some activity in Missouri and West Virginia.
So how does this square with other laws in Texas governing the use of psychedelics for treatment?
Well, funny enough, Texas is kind of working on another psychedelic right now in mental health called ketamine, where they're trying to make some rules and regulations for that. A lot of the issues they've seen with ketamine is it's so widely available that anybody is using it. And so what they're trying to do is narrow it down to a medical use. And so it seems like Texas is kind of embracing psychedelics in a way, but more in a medical purpose.
So what are the next steps now?
Well, currently, it'll be probably up to the universities to kind of designate who will be taking on what part of the research. And once that gets figured out, we'll start the whole process of like clinical trials, trying to see sort of where this medicine could be used and having some of those kind of studies done. But currently, right now, it's still illegal in America. So it would only be at a clinical trial basis.
Yeah, very interesting. So what are you looking for? I mean, there's so much hope involved in psychedelics as a treatment, but again, it's very costly, and then you have to win approval from the FDA.
Yeah, so what I've been talking to some very ibogaine experts, they said they're very hopeful, and this is a lot of encouraging signs, but they caution people that this is going to take some time. They said ibogaine, while it's a good drug, it's also dangerous. It does cause heart problems. It can kill you. So it's not just something they just want to rush out into the market real fast. They want to take some time with it.
Well, and finally, are you surprised Texas has taken such an active role in developing these psychedelics?
A little bit, but then, like you kind of mentioned, was sort of wondering why maybe the federal government want to be involved with this. It seems like a lot of the issues involve veteran mental health issues. A lot of veterans are having problems post-COVID, and they're all trying to find different ways to address some of these problems without just medication. So a lot of psychedelic research is starting to come into mental health, and it's starting to show some good signs there. So I'm a little bit surprised, but also it seems to be a trend that we're headed.
Yeah, and clearly the focus on veteran mental health. We've been speaking to Stephen Simpson, who covers mental health for the Texas Tribune. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again.
A set of regulations that established the first standards for digital accessibility for public entities was set to go into effect this Friday. State and local governments that serve more than 50,000 people would have had to make online materials accessible to those who are blind, deaf, or have physical disabilities. But on Monday, the Trump administration announced a one-year delay in implementing the rules, citing claims that cities and states need more time. Advocates for people with disabilities say the rules are part of the Americans with Disabilities Act and should go into effect as planned. The Standard Shelley Brisbane has been tracking events leading up to this week's Title II deadline, and she's here to tell us more. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Angela.
Well, what are the new rules and how are they connected to the ADA?
So Title II of the ADA says that no person with a qualifying disability can be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of services, programs, and activities of a public entity. And what that means is you have to allow people with disabilities to participate in government just the same as anybody else. And that includes, in our modern age, websites and mobile apps. So these rules specify websites and mobile apps now must be made accessible so that folks with disabilities can participate in government just as anyone else would.
Well, what kind of accessibility are state and local governments required to provide?
So for blind users, support for screen readers or high contrast so that folks with low vision can actually access the website. For people with physical disabilities, the ability to use a keyboard instead of a mouse if they're not unable to do so. And for deaf individuals, it might be captioning or other text-based ways to consume audio content from websites and mobile apps.
So the rules were set to go into effect this Friday, as we said, at least for large state and local governments. Why did the administration delay them?
Yeah, so these rules specifically affected any state or local entity that served a large population and then the rules would have affected smaller organizations a year after that. And so what the Justice Department did was delay everything by a year. So 1 year from now, big entities, and 2 years from now, small entities are expected to comply with these regulations. And the Justice Department says that they wanted to give those large organizations more time to get their websites ready and more accessible. Disability advocates don't agree that they need more time. I spoke to Sharon Rush, who's the executive director of Nobility, an Austin-based accessibility consulting firm.
It's the law of the land. It's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So whether people think that's going to be enforced or not, there are always those private lawsuits that people file. The risk is still there, even if the deadline is pushed back a year.
So now what's expected to happen when the year-long extension ends?
Well, it's unclear. The Justice Department hasn't said what they're going to do in a year, but they have indicated that it's possible that they will open up another public comment period. There had been public comments some time ago before these regulations went into effect, and the regulations that these rules are based on are very well known in the accessibility and web development community. So it's really uncertain what additional public comment would provide for the Justice Department, but it will give cities and state governments who have been unable to make their websites accessible so far more time to comply with those rules.
So was this delay a surprise?
Well, yes and no. It wasn't clear exactly what the Justice Department would do, but because these rules come out of the ADA and because they have been around for a while, there was a hope among disability advocates that there would not be any sort of change or delay. But because the Trump administration has been somewhat hostile to regulations affecting a variety of state and local interactions with federal government, there was some suggestion that this sort of delay would either be put in place or that the Justice Department simply wouldn't enforce the rules that were already in place.
And in the little time we have, what else are you keeping an eye on when it comes to meeting the accessibility requirements down the road?
Well, of course, state and local governments aren't prevented from meeting these accessibility requirements. The law just gives them a little bit more time. So it'll be interesting to see whether the entities will use that time to make their sites, if they're not already accessible, even more accessible, and whether those organizations will just go ahead and take the initiative and provide accessibility compliance for their customers.
Shelley Brisbane covers disability issues for The Standard. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
For many rural Texans, finding specialized medical treatment means leaving home and traveling long distances. A new cancer treatment center in Lubbock is now offering life-saving care for patients in West Texas. Details ahead. Also, Texas restaurants rely heavily on immigrant workers, and the ICE crackdown has cut into profits. Restaurant owners are now asking the Trump administration for help, including more work permits. Those stories and much more when The Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Monthly Presents This Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas. Stories about our culture and what's at stake from the perspective of the magazine's writers. Airing weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. One of the biggest healthcare gaps in Texas is literal distance. For many patients, especially in rural parts of the state, getting specialized treatment can mean hours on the road or having to leave home altogether. But it's hoped that a new 120,000 square foot cancer center in Lubbock will help close that gap, at least in part, for many in rural West Texas. Brad Bird of KTTZ has more.
Lubbock area lawmakers and administrators with UMC and the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center gathered outside the facility to cut the ribbon last week. The new TLC2 Foundation Cancer Center triples the size of the current facilities, with the goal of providing more localized treatment in an area of the state where, for many cancer patients, accessing the latest treatment has often required driving 6 hours or more to the nearest equipped facility. According to the Centers for Disease Control, rural patients face a 15% higher chance of death in urban patients because of the lack of advanced care. In 2025, the Texas legislature secured $25 million in one-time funding to establish the Rural Cancer Collaborative with Texas Tech's Health Sciences Center. The partnership with local healthcare providers is designed to bring new tools and mobile or telehealth services even closer to rural patients. I'm Brad Burt in Lubbock.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. In Texas, the immigration debate's long been framed as politics, but now it's being reframed as survival. Survival for the businesses that feed the Lone Star State. There's a new report in the New York Times that finds restaurant owners, farmers, and industry groups in Texas breaking across traditional political lines and warning that immigration crackdowns are driving away workers, raising costs, and threatening whether some businesses can continue to stay open at all. In a state where undocumented workers make up a significant portion of the labor force, the question really isn't abstract anymore. What happens to the Texas economy if that workforce disappears? Jesus Jimenez reports on North Texas for the New York Times. Jesus, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hi, thanks for having me.
As a very memorable line from this story, you're talking with a Texas restaurant owner who says, "This moment now feels worse than the pandemic." Could you say a little bit more about what specifically has changed on the ground to make things in the restaurant business feel that dark and gloomy?
Yeah, it's been a number of things. One, we've just seen food costs go up over the past few years. And so costs are up and sales are down. Last year, only 50% of restaurants in Texas reported that they were profitable. And that is actually higher than the national standard, which I believe was about 42% of restaurants nationally last year who said they were not profitable.
Is all of that due to what's happening with immigration enforcement? Or surely it's not. You mentioned the inflation, for example, right?
Yeah, it's not all due to that, but labor is another thing that restaurant owners and farm workers are struggling with. That even immigrants who are documented and have some form of legal status have been afraid to go to work, afraid to go out. I've heard from a lot of restaurant owners who have said that the immigration rates that we've seen across the country have created sort of a chilling effect. And so in Texas, we haven't really seen the sort of LA style, Chicago style immigration rates, but they are happening seemingly every day across the state. And in some instances at even higher rates. And so all of this is creating this culture where suddenly you have people who are not, are afraid to go to work, are afraid to go out. And so they're dealing with that on top of, the increase in food costs and other things like that.
This seems like an unusual alliance of business groups in Texas. Together, what are they pushing for and how closely are they working together in pushing for it?
Yeah, there's a mix of things that they are pushing for. One is just work permits for restaurant workers, and also maybe farm workers, and that would just allow employers to be able to hire people legally and not be as worried about immigration coming to your restaurant or place of business. There's also a piece of proposed legislation called the Dignity Act, and that is a bit more all-encompassing than just work permits. I believe there's about an amount of $7,000 in restitution. Immigrants who have had to have been in the country for a certain amount of years, obviously pass a background check. And so that's a bit more expansive. I've heard from some owners who are saying, we just love the work permit and figure out the rest of it. And so there's been pros and cons to this. Some people say that, work permit without a pathway to citizenship is unfair to immigrants who have been in the country for very long. And there's also opposition from people who are saying any form of work permit for undocumented immigrants is amnesty and goes too far.
Yeah. How uniquely exposed is the Texas economy as you see it?
One thing that I think surprises some people out of Texas is that by some estimates, about 1 in 10 members of the Texas workforce are undocumented. And that's not to say that 1 in 10 members of the Texas workforce are not showing up for work. But that is a significant portion, and that's just undocumented immigrants. Immigrants overall make up an even larger portion of the Texas economy. And so if you've got this chilling effect where people are afraid to go out, afraid to go to work, I think it affects the economy a lot. And I had one restaurant owner who told me it's not just that they're afraid to go to work or afraid to go out. If they're not going out, they're not spending money. And if they're not spending money, then that's hurting them too. So it's twofold. And some restaurant owners are, having a hard time convincing their employees to go to work. And you also have clients who are now afraid to go dine out because they don't want to be caught up in some sort of raid or immigration enforcement effort.
Well, there's obviously a tension here because there are calls for more enforcement on the one hand, certainly among Republicans backing the Trump administration, and then you have business demands for labor on the other. Are policymakers engaging with that contradiction or sort of avoiding it?
Yeah, there is a sort of mixed bag. I talked to some members of Congress who have co-sponsored this Dignity Act bill, and it is a fairly balanced proposed piece of legislation. I think the last I checked, there was 20 Democratic lawmakers and 20 Republicans. And I talked to one of the congresswomen who had introduced the bill who said they're being very targeted and very just focused on making sure that whoever is co-sponsoring this piece of legislation is making it a balanced effect. And so she told me, or a balanced process. And so what they want is for every Democrat, one Republican to go on board. And they believe that with more bipartisan support, then they'd be more likely to be able to achieve some sort of legislation.
Jesus, let me ask you something, just sort of bottom line for listeners. If nothing changes, what does this look like for Texans in everyday terms when it comes to, say, for consumers? How does this hit home?
I think it's part of it is hard to predict, but I heard a good story the other day, which is that people were going to a restaurant in Texas and they stepped in and there was plenty of empty seats and places where they could sit down, but the restaurant didn't have a lot of staff. And so they had to just section off a piece of the restaurant so they could see as many people as they could serve without being too swamped. And I think you might see more instances like that. You might go to a big chain restaurant and you've got a whole wing of the restaurant that's available, but you only have so many servers to be able to seat so many people and serve them at the same time. And so you'll see a mix of that and maybe also higher prices for food if business owners are struggling to pay the bills.
Jesus Jimenez is based in Dallas for the New York Times. We'll link to his latest story at texasstandard.org. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harrop. Attorney General Ken Paxton is suing the Act Blue political donations platform. Our Dylan Duke reports the suit is the latest in a series of actions taken against the platform.
Paxton claims Act Blue allows improper donations from people outside the country. He also alleged the platform allows people to bypass donation limits. Act Blue raised nearly $2 billion last year for Democratic candidates and causes. He previously opened an investigation into Act Blue in December 2023. Afterwards, he sent a letter to the Federal Elections Commission claiming he had uncovered evidence of election interference. The donation platform calls the investigations baseless and politically motivated. I'm Dylan Duke in Dallas.
The Trump administration has begun taking applications to refund close to $170 billion in emergency tariffs, which the Supreme Court ruled it had collected illegally. Casey Wright, business manager for Houghton Horns near Fort Worth, says applying for the refunds is a complex process for small businesses.
In our case, somebody at FedEx is going to have to sit down and process through it and then send the money on to us. And we're just kind of at their mercy right now and have not heard from them a timeline on if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection has opened a website to process tariff refund requests. But in the case of many small businesses like Houghton Horns, those requests must be filed by the freight forwarder that originally paid the tariff, which then has the option of passing along the refund to its clients. And the Spurs 7'4" Victor Wembanyama has a new title, Defensive Player of the Year. Texas Public Radio's Dan Katz reports he was the first unanimous selection in NBA history.
Anyone who tried to score on him this season likely came away with a story, and maybe a block shot.
Wemby sends it away. Shoots it and blocked by Wemby on the three. Ingram no look. Hurdle sent away by Wemby. He kept it. That's not going to work.
Wemby led the league in blocks and made life difficult for just about everyone.
My shot blocking is something I've been working on forever, so it's probably the area in my game where I feel most comfortable at.
At just 22 years old, he's still in the running for MVP, and he's keeping it in perspective.
I couldn't get this award, and I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for my teammates who actually, do the rotations and allow me to be in the spotlight.
For Wembanyama and the Spurs, the next goal is simpler: win the next game. Game 2 against the Trailblazers tips off tonight at 7 p.m. at the Frost Bank Center. I'm Dan Katz in San Antonio.
I'm Matt Harab in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Texas Monthly Presents The Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas, our culture, and what's at stake, from the perspective of the magazine's writers. Weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
This is the Texas Standard. My name's Arav Rao. I am a sophomore at Jasper High School in Plano, and I've really just been into tech and building stuff, and that's sort of what led me to creating projects like SmartBin and Recycle AI. So over here you can see the full bin. There are 4 compartments: the organic, e-waste, recyclable, and non-recyclable bins. So how it works is every time the ultrasonic sensor detects an object placed on the platform within a 20 centimeters threshold, it sends a message to the camera to capture the image, and then once the image is captured, it gets sent to my EC2 backend where classification occurs, and then the Raspberry Pi in turn sends a message to the servo motor to automatically move the platform and make the item fall into the right bin. One of the biggest influence, I would say, came from visiting India, where my grandparents live. So over there are actually a lot of good recycling laws, and most people really try to follow them. But there's still like a ton of confusion about what's recyclable and what's not, and like how to separate those things properly. I also realized over there's like a lot of manual labor that goes into like validating everything if they've actually sorted the items correctly. So I just felt that was very inefficient and unsustainable. And then later, obviously, when I volunteered as a green ambassador for the Plano International Festival, I saw that even here in the US, people actually struggle to recycle things correctly. So I wanted to build something that could like take away that confusion and completely remove the need for people to manually sort through trash. So after all of those experiences and after years of prototyping and refining, I built the Smart Bin, which is basically an AI-powered bin that automatically identifies and separates your waste. So Smart Bin is essentially an AI-powered trash bin that can identify what type of waste you're throwing away. Like, it identifies right now into 4 main categories: recyclables, non-recyclables, organic, or e-waste. And then after it identifies it, it automatically sorts it into the right section using servo motors. So right now it works perfectly fine, but let's be honest, it's like a little DIY kind of. So getting a manufacturer involved would really let me build something that looks more professional and could actually be used in schools or apartment complexes, which is my eventual goal. So I took the same technology and built the Recycle AI web application that's basically a more scalable version of SmartBin that lets people take a picture and identify if it's recyclable or not. The users can also click Learn More, where they can see descriptions of how to dispose of that waste properly, and they can also find nearby waste centers near them using geolocation. Like right now it's a web application, but I envision to make it a full cross-platform mobile app that works well on both iOS and Android devices, so more people can access it, I would say. So this would make it easier for people to use it anywhere and also make it more accessible and better off in the long run. The main type of items I would say that people are confused upon are different types of plastics and styrofoam waste. So there are plastics called LDPE plastics, PPE plastics, PEP plastics, and there's also different numbers associated with that, right? So PPE type 4, PPE type 2. So all those different plastics, they may not be recyclable in one area, or they may be recyclable in another area. So what's recyclable in Plano, for example, might not be in Frisco, because each city has different recycling guidelines and different recycling laws. So when a user disposes a styrofoam item in the recyclable bin, for example, it will not go to the correct place and will just end up in the landfill and just contaminate entire batches. So the impact and the future for the app, I would say, is there's a lot of potential for it, right? There's a lot of users already using the app, and I know there's still like a lot of refinements that need to go into making the app better. But hopefully over the next few years, I can definitely refine both the bin and the app to make it a more production level materials, production level items to help people recycle better. Even small actions, right? Just like building a small bin or an app can help people really recycle better and can be really great for the environment. So like, this was like a really small idea I had a couple of years back, and then now it's grown into something huge. So like, it really shows like even how small ideas with like motivation and commitment can grow into something that's beyond what you thought it could grow into, right? My name is Arav Rao, and these were my projects, Smart Bin and Recycle AI, and you're listening to the Texas Standard.
Earth Day is tomorrow, and the Texas Standard wants to hear from you. Go to texasstandard.org/talk and record a message we can share on air. Tell us what you think the biggest environmental issue facing Texas is and what can be done about it. That's texasstandard.org/talk. Just press the orange record button to leave us a message, and we can share it on the show.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider committed to helping Texas communities and emphasizing safety. More at texasmutual.com/TexansGetIt.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. If you visit the UT School of Social Work right now, you'll find the walls hung with portraits of Central Texans who lost their lives to drug addiction. The exhibit is titled Into the Light, and it's intended to fight stigma and humanize the victims of overdoses from opioids and other substances. KUT's Olivia Aldridge visited the exhibit with two women whose children were among the portraits.
On the second floor of Walter Webb Hall, pencil drawings of nearly 36 people line the walls. Among them are Josh Bell, a 33-year-old with soulful eyes, and Brandon Lash, a 27-year-old with a broad smile. Josh and Brandon never knew each other, but now their moms do.
It's a different loss than my child died to cancer. My people are more afraid to talk to us than there would be another mother that maybe lost her child to a different disease.
That's Annie Hernandez. She's Josh's mom, and originally from Ireland, if you couldn't guess. She met Lisa Lash through an overdose loss group at the Christie Center, an organization that provides grief support for Central Texans. Lisa says hearing stories like hers and her son Brandon's has helped her navigate his loss.
There's some kind of comfort in knowing you're not the only one.
That's part of why Annie and Lisa submitted their son's stories to the Into Light project. Since losing Josh and Brandon to overdoses, the mothers have been working to raise awareness about what opioid addiction looks like and to show that addiction can happen to anyone: sons, daughters, parents, friends. Next to each portrait is a written narrative about the person's life. Annie and Lisa submitted a detailed application that a professional writer used to paint a picture of their sons with words. And Lisa says reliving all those memories wasn't easy.
It was very intense. I had to step away from it for a couple weeks, and I'm like, I'm not sure I can do this.
But she did. The narrative next to her son Brandon's portrait forms an impression of a sensitive and charismatic young man, an animal lover with a way for words who could always be counted on to correct his friends' spelling and grammar. Much like Lisa describes Brandon, Annie remembers her son Josh as a bright and charismatic person who never met a stranger. He loved sports and cheered especially hard for the Patriots. He was dedicated to his family.
Oh man, that child had my heart the minute he was born. I have 4 children, but this one knows exactly how to get whatever he wants.
For years, Josh continued to show up for family events and seemed like his normal self. No one realized he was struggling with addiction behind the scenes for a long time. It started with taking opioids that were prescribed after he was in a car accident. From there, things snowballed.
I didn't realize he was not taking 2 a day, he was taking 24 a day. So to get the other 22, he had to buy them on the street. And then, like so many stories, that equates to, can't afford this anymore, can't hide it from my wife anymore, so you go to something cheaper, which was heroin.
Josh underwent treatment for his addiction, but he died of an overdose in 2019. Annie believes a pill laced with fentanyl was responsible. Today, Annie's an outspoken advocate for addiction treatment, harm reduction, and education. But at first, she struggled to know how to talk about losing Josh. There was just so much stigma about addiction.
People might have an idea in their mind what a drug addict is, right? And I was no different. A million reasons I would think my son would die would never be of drugs.
Reducing stigma and spreading awareness about addiction were key goals of the Into Light Project's founder, Teresa Clower. After Clower's son Devin died of an overdose in 2018, she drew a portrait of him as a way of processing her grief. For 3 days, Clower put pencil to paper, studying each tiny detail of her late son's face.
A few days later, I signed my name, and that was my goodbye to Devin.
It was goodbye, but it was also a beginning. Afterward, Clower was surprised by a desire to draw portraits of everyone she met, from her grandchildren to people on the street. She had the idea to give her passion a purpose. What if she could use portraits to connect with other people who had lost a loved one to drug overdose? The first exhibit was held in Maryland, Devin's home state, in 2019. In the early days, Clower drew many portraits herself, but she hired other artists as the project grew. Each brings their own style, but every portrait is rendered as a simple black and white graphite drawing.
We're all made up of light and dark. No one should be defined by their darkest moments. We focus on the whole person very intentionally because we all are made up of lots of different parts. And, my own son, Devin, he had a tremendous personality, and he was addicted to drugs.
The 34 individuals memorialized at the Texas Into Light exhibit represent a small fraction of addiction-related deaths that have taken place in recent years. Drug poisoning deaths skyrocketed by 68% statewide between 2019 and 2024. But we've started to see signs of improvement. Last year, local officials announced drug-related deaths in Travis County had decreased by 22% between 2023 and 2024. Claycy Claiborne, the director of UT's Addiction Research Institute, credits this to widespread distribution of the overdose reversing treatment naloxone, from local law enforcement to bar owners to regular Joes.
3 years ago, the public had no idea how dangerous the drug supply is, and it's continuing to be dangerous. However, we have trained everyday citizens across Central Texas to actually be first responders.
However, Claiborne says we're still in a dangerous phase of the opioid crisis, with only around 20% of Americans with a substance abuse disorder getting treatment. She wants to see more work done to prevent relapse and get people into treatment sooner. She also wants to see more support for the families and loved ones of people who struggle with addiction.
Overdose impacts the entire family system. It impacts so many people.
That's where grief groups like the one Annie and Lisa joined come in. The women have found vital support through the group and have provided it, shepherding other members through the Into Light exhibit on campus. Lisa says supporting each other through their shared tragedies has led to a real bond.
We've become very good friends.
Yeah.
When Brandon died, he left Lisa behind a tiny French bulldog pug mix named Jellyfish. Sometimes Annie helps out by dog sitting. Other times, Annie and Lisa get together, and Jellyfish weaves through the legs of Annie's large dogs. It's not always easy to laugh, but it's easier with a hapless mutt named Jellyfish around. I'm Olivia Aldridge in Austin.
The Into the Light exhibit is open through May 23rd at UT's Walter Webb Hall. It's been a wet few days in many parts of Texas, and there's more rain in the forecast. There's a small chance of flash flooding across a large swath of the state. The National Weather Service is monitoring an area roughly from Dallas-Fort Worth to Houston for potential flood activity. All of this rain has not been enough to pull some areas of the state out of a persistent drought. The U.S. Drought Monitor shows that 78% of the state is in some stage of drought, although that has dropped 12 percentage points in just the last week. That's thanks to recent rains. The Panhandle and parts of South Texas are going through the most extreme bouts of dryness. Wheat farmers in far North Texas have struggled, according to the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Producers of other crops like cotton and corn are also hoping for a bit more precipitation before they plant for the season. The drought has also moved ranchers to keep their cattle herds relatively small, which means those high beef prices at the grocery store may stay that way a while longer. Stay with us. The Texas Standard will be right back after this quick break.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. The Texas Medical Board has disciplined 3 doctors whose patients died after receiving delayed or inappropriate pregnancy care under the state's strict abortion ban. Facing risks of prison time and professional ruin, there have been reports of doctors delaying key interventions for pregnant patients. Here to tell us more, Lizzie Presser, who has been reporting on this issue for ProPublica. Lizzie, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hi, David. Thanks so much for having me.
Give us some details about these 3 cases, if you could. What kind of care was needed and apparently not provided?
So these doctors were involved in the care of 2 pregnant patients whose deaths we investigated at ProPublica last year. One of them was experiencing a pretty common miscarriage. She was only 11 weeks along when she started bleeding very heavily. It was that heavy bleeding, though, that put her from a low-risk miscarriage into a higher-risk category. And what she needed desperately was a DNC, a procedure to empty her uterus. Instead, her doctor, Dr. Andrew Ryan Davis at Houston Methodist Sugarland Hospital, steered her and her husband who was with her towards misoprostol, which was inappropriate in this particular circumstance. And that's what we found in our reporting a year ago, and it's what the Texas Medical Board found in their investigation of Dr. Davis's care as well, and cited his failure to provide her the DNC that she desperately needed. She died of hemorrhage at 11 weeks pregnant, leaving behind 2 sons.
Could you explain why was it that the doctor was apparently reluctant to proceed with DNC? I think some people may not understand the relationship between that and Texas's abortion ban.
You know, the Dr. Davis never responded to our questions. We asked multiple times to hear from him directly, and the hospital, too, even though it was given a release to speak with us about Portia's care, never responded to our questions about her care either. So we can only write what we have heard from dozens of OBGYNs across Texas and even more across other states that have banned abortion, which is that DNCs in the wake of these bans have been stigmatized. And doctors are reluctant to provide a procedure that is so closely related to abortion care, even though a DNC is sometimes the appropriate care for a miscarriage, like it would have been in Portia Gumezzi's case. And so it's just, there has been a chilling effect since these bans have come into play, where doctors are much more afraid and hesitant to provide a procedure that can look on paper like an abortion.
I mentioned that 3 doctors have been disciplined. You talked about, what was it? You mentioned 1 case. Are there 3 cases, or what exactly?
The other 2 doctors were involved in the care of an 18-year-old, Nevaeh Crane, who lived in Vicar, Texas, and she was experiencing an infection. And both of these doctors failed to properly treat her, and she died at about 6 months pregnant with her fetus still in her womb because she had not been able to get the care she needed, which in her case would have been a DNE, it's like a DNC, but it's for second trimester. So it is a more complicated procedure to clear the uterus. She had an infection that was spreading, and it ultimately became septic because neither of these doctors intervened in a timely manner to save her life.
You said that you've reached out to these doctors. They have not responded to your questions. Did the doctors get a chance to explain to the Texas Medical Board why they made the decisions they did?
If they did, those hearings are not publicly available, and instead all three of the doctors have accepted the citations and the discipline that they received from the Texas Medical Board.
Citations, discipline, what does that amount to?
It's a very good question. So as you said at the top, if you provide an illegal abortion in Texas, you face up to 99 years in prison, the loss of your medical license. The Texas Medical Board in this instance has determined that, at least in the case of Nevaeh Crane, the two doctors who did not provide her with adequate care, those decisions led to her death. In the case of Portia Gumezi, they said it likely led to her death, but they couldn't say if a DNC would have saved her life. The discipline for each of these doctors, David, was 8 hours of continuing medical education.
That's it?
That's right.
There was no further discipline, no, for instance, temporary lift of their ability to practice medicine or anything like that?
No. And when I spoke to Hope Gumezi, Portia's husband, who he lost his wife a couple of years ago now, that was the first thing he said to me too. Like, what? This is a slap in the face. I don't think this doctor should be practicing anymore. I will say, though, that when we did speak with advocates and lawyers across Texas who have worked on malpractice cases and are more involved in the Texas Medical Board's responses to cases like these, they were pleasantly surprised that the Texas Medical Board did anything and cited these deficiencies and provided this discipline, because it was, however small, an acknowledgement that these doctors failed to provide the appropriate care to these young women who really needed miscarriage management and were unable to get it in a timely manner.
How do these cases in Texas fit into the broader national patchwork of abortion restrictions?
Very similar in a way. I mean, what we're seeing in Texas is the laws are written in such a way that are pretty common now in states that have banned abortion. What we see in Texas is that this started earlier than other states, and that the criminal penalties are much more severe. And that piece of it, I do think, is important, David. We've heard from so many doctors across Texas who refer back to those criminal penalties and the fear of being the poster child, the first doctor who the Attorney General makes a case out of and sends to or tries to put in prison. And that wasn't happening for a long time, but there is an active case now against a midwife in Texas for providing an unlawful abortion, and she's lost her practices and faces significant time in prison if she's found guilty.
Lizzie Presser reports for ProPublica, and we're going to have a link to her reporting on these specific cases at texasstandard.org. Lizzie, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for talking about this with me.
We're out of time for today's program, but you can keep up with the news 24/7 at texasstandard.org and look for us on social media at Texas Standard. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Michael Marks, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer. Leah Scarpelli is our director, and Casey Cheek is our technical director. Our spring interns are Riddy Bora and Justin Dowd. Managing editor of the Texas Standard is Gabriel Munoz, and our managing producer is Laura Rice. Our executive producer is Rhonda Fanning. We're back tomorrow with a look at the energy demands of data centers in Texas and much more. Hope you can join us. Until then, from all of us at the Standard, thanks for listening. I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso, wishing you the very best.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Woldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.